Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei was the true dragon of the apocalypse? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei walked in the middle of a grove of trees to reach his destination, the church. The young man had his gaze shadowed as the gem on his gauntlet glowed every so often. Mate, try to control your emotions. It's dangerous for you to use so much boost. It's no use increasing your strength so much if you reach over boost. Drake had a worried tone in his words. Issei looked up with a completely serene expression on his face. He stopped clenching his gauntlet tightly and paused as he saw that he was already relatively close to the church. Relax, Drake. I'm perfectly fine. I just want to go in with all my power and try to bust them all without them noticing my presence. Sorry to disappoint you, boy. But we're not idiots enough not to patrol the area when we're about to do something very important. Issei could feel his skin crawl as he saw 3 fallen angels appear through the trees. 2 of them were already familiar to him. I appreciate if you would turn around and leave the place. We don't want to get in trouble with the Gremory family, but not for that reason will we allow you to screw up Raynare's plans. Clarified the fallen angel known as Donasik. Issei raised his gauntlet at the same time as he gave him a piercing look. Why are you doing this to Asia? All she wanted was to serve God and have friends. The 3 fallen angels looked at each other and smirked arrogantly. I can see that you have become much stronger than in our first encounter. But you still have a ways to go before you can beat one of us. So what makes you think you can take the 3 of us together? Raynare questioned, holding a clear air of superiority in her words. Issei just gritted his teeth as a boost could be heard. He may have been a fool, but not even a mental moron would answer that he could take all 3 of them no problem. The only thing pushing him to battle was Asia. After all, he said so himself. He could never forgive himself if he didn't do something about it. Are you still here? Apparently you want to die, don't you? The fallen angel blonde spoke with a slightly macabre smile on her features, though it didn't look very good with how small her body was. He never mentioned it would be a 3-on-1. A muffled, apathetic voice was heard from behind the fallen angels, causing them to turn around with a raised eyebrow. Issei recognized that voice immediately, so he was slightly surprised. What's more, he never mentioned that he was going to fight you guys. A distinctly male voice echoed through the trees, only to be followed by the appearance of 4 figures very familiar to Issei. But you? Issei exclaimed in great surprise at the sight of the complete Gremory peerage. Riaz directed a friendly smile at his pawn. Issei, you can continue on your way along with Kiba and Kaneko. Akeno and I will take care of this problem. At the president's statement, Akeno licked one of her fingers with a sadistic and seductive expression, causing Issei to blush a little. But thanks to his recent hormonal control, he downplayed it almost instantly. Okay, but you, thank you very much. Riaz just nodded with a confident smile as Issei ran past her and his 2 companions followed shortly after, first giving a satisfied nod to their mistress. Well, this will be an easy enough job. Exclaimed the blonde girl fully confident of her victory. Don't get overconfident, middled. Remember, this is the Gremory family we're talking about and their power of destruction can be devastating. Raynare warned with a slight frown. Donasik laughed loudly. I don't care if that brat is from the Gremory family or some high-class family. This last, he said with a distinctly sarcastic and mocking tone, then adjusted his hat with a superior smile. There's 3 of us and 2 of them, plus she's a mere brat. She must not even have awakened the power of destruction yet. We'll see about that. Riaz replied with a confident smile, then looked at Akeno. The woman just laughed in a somewhat strange way and looked at her opponents lewdly as she raised her hand. A large lightning bolt began to form along her palm. At the sight, the 3 fallen angels widened their eyes slightly in surprise. Issei burst loudly into the doors of the church, giving them a big kick and sending them flying. From behind him followed Kiba and Kaneko, who were on the lookout for any dangerous situation that might arise. Issei ran along with his companions as they looked in various directions, not understanding why the place was completely empty. Asia and Raynare were supposed to be here. The 2 of them, and besides. Oh. Look who we have here. The 3 companions stopped dead in their tracks as Freed appeared from behind a wall as he turned his distinguished psychopathic grin on them. I still have yet to repay you for what you did to me last time, funking demon. Freed declared, licking the tip of his sword in a grim manner. Where's Asia? Freed was a bit surprised by Issei's question because he didn't seem to be paying the slightest bit of attention to him. The white-haired man looked back and pointed to an entrance leading down. There's ritual going on down there. There's also a lot of priests, but I don't like crowds. You know, he clarified with his typical psychotic tone. Issei started to advance at a fast pace towards the entrance, not caring that Freed was in front of the entrance. Kiba and Kaneko watched this seriously as they prepared to battle Freed in the worst-case situation. Fried raised an amused eyebrow. Are you ignoring me? Remember I owe you one for last time. This time I'll be sure to cut you into 1,000 pieces and you'll be reduced to little pieces of shit as it should be. Fried exclaimed with a sing-song tone at the end as he wagged his tongue wildly. Fried quickly stepped into the middle of the road, causing Issei to clench his teeth and his fists tightly. I don't have time for this. Shouted Issei, pouncing at a speed Fried couldn't keep up with. A strong red light burst from the gauntlet as Issei's fist sank into Fried's cheek, causing the subject to let out a scream of pain and fly off with a spray of blood on his nose and face. His flight ended when he crashed hard against the benches in the area, knocking him unconscious. Issei wasted no time and went down with his two companions, only to be shocked by the sight. Or at least, Issei was shocked. There were about 40 priests in the place who seemed to be praying to Raynare, while the woman was a few stairs up, next to a cross. Worst of all, was what was hanging on that cross. Asia? Issei shouted loudly, watching helplessly as the blonde was hanging on the cross. Seeing it, Raynare gave a somewhat ghoulish grin as she played with the gift Issei had bestowed upon her. Oh, so you came to witness the nun's death. In a slightly more normal moment, Issei would have asked Raynare why she was still wearing the bracelet he had given her on their date. But it wasn't a very normal situation to say the least. Why are you doing this to her? Issei stepped forward in great anger, causing the priests to step in front of him. Raynare looked at him graciously. Why am I doing this? You know she possesses a very strong sacred gear, right? My boss ordered me to take it to keep for myself because dark but fun times will begin to arise before too long. And he wants to make sure we're in the top spot when it happens. Boss? What the funk are you talking about? You know whatever. Issei thought as he looked at Asia with great concern. Before Issei could act, a loud scream rang through the place. Asia? Issei shouted loudly as he watched a nun scream in pain, being surrounded by a green aura. Raynare watched all this in fascination. Issei tried to run again, but the priests blocked his way again. Before any of them could attack the brown-haired man, Kiba and Kaneko rushed towards the priests, swinging swords and punches at them, respectively. Seeing this, the corrupted priests took several steps back, impressed at the strength Kiba and Kaneko had, creating a path for Issei. Oh, Haidu. We'll take care of them. Kiba commented with a smile. We've got your back, Haidu. Kaneko backed up the blonde's words with her typical apathetic tone. Issei looked at the two of them as his eyes glistened from being on the verge of tears. Okay. But when we get out of here, I want you both to call me by my name. Issei shouted loudly as he wiped his eyes and ran to where Raynare was. Kaneko and Kiba just nodded at Issei's proposal and continued to battle against the corrupted priests. Issei stopped in his tracks and watched in horror as the green light began to fade and with it, Asia's screams. It's already too late, Raynare declared, reaching out his hands to take a ring that glowed a green color. The sacred gear, Twilight Healing, is mine. With it, I will be invincible. Raynare exclaimed, spreading her wings and beginning to laugh like mad. Issei didn't give a damn about what the woman who tricked him said and rushed over to let go of Asia with the intention of carrying her in his arms. The blonde looked at him and smiled weakly. Issei's eyes started to get watery again, but not a tear fell. AC, I'm so sorry if I had come earlier. Issei lowered his head a little and closed his eyes tightly, causing a small tear to escape from his right eye. Issei was surprised when Asia brushed the tear away, then positioned her hand on Issei's cheek affectionately. I'm glad I had a friend, Issei. Issei watched in shock as a tear began to run down the side of her eyes. Thank you so much for making me feel so happy in just one day. Asia's tear fell and she closed her eyes, causing Issei to hug her tightly in great pain. In the end, he had been unable to do anything. But he could still avenge her. A small violet spark flashed within Issei's soul, causing Drake to become alarmed at the sight. Issei looked back with great hatred to see if Raynare was still there, but saw no one. He could only see a large amount of black feathers leading to the upper floor. I'm sorry, Issei. We couldn't stop her at first. But she must still be upstairs, confident of her victory thanks to her new power. Kiba commented, a little worried about the great hatred that was emanating from his new friend. It was so weird, even Kaneko was surprised. He wasn't supposed to have demonic corruption, so it's not normal for a human to have so much hatred. Take care of Asia. Kaneko and Kiba looked at him in surprise. But I'll personally take care of her. Kaneko was interrupted by Issei, causing them both to look at him even more surprised. Issei, she is a fallen angel and now possesses a sacred gear. She's much stronger than the priest you faced. Kiba tried to talk some sense into Issei to no avail. I know. Was all he replied as he left Asia in Kiba's hands and began to move forward with great hatred in every step he took. Raynare was quietly waiting for Ria's Gremory's arrival as she was very confident of her new power. In fact, too confident. It's beautiful, Raynare commented in a low voice as she looked at the ring on her finger in admiration. Her close study of the ring was interrupted when Issei appeared through the door, causing Raynare to look at him superiorly. "Oh, you still feel like fighting? I'd rather take the Gremory as proof of my victory. I'm giving you a chance to save yourself from the demons, and you still want to die." Issei lowered his head a little, not really paying attention to Raynare's words. Even if he had only known her for a day, Raynare had been his girlfriend. Even if it had been for one day, he had really had a good time and had even considered giving up seeing other women by having Yuma with him. After all, would he really need to see many women if he could see his lover's beautiful eyes every day? That's what he had thought. He just wanted to give love to her and receive that love in return. Issei really appreciated her. And now it turns out that she not only cheated, hurt, betrayed, and killed him. But she also killed someone he could call a friend, never mind that he didn't have much time to get to know her. "You were my first girlfriend." Raynare looked at his bracelet with mock tenderness. "Yeah, from what I could tell, you were incredibly new at it. A guy who has yet to meet a woman, I'll admit it was all in good fun." Issei clenched his fists tightly as his gaze darkened. "I was going to treat you like a queen. Yes, that much was clear to me. For that very reason it was so entertaining to see your panicked face when that dream was shattered." Raynare replied in a distinctly mocking tone, mimicking Yuma's voice. Issei clenched his fists even tighter, causing blood to start oozing out on his free hand. "I thought our thing would be something special." Raynare laughed loudly. "That's right, it was something very special. I kept your gift for myself to remember the day you died." Raynare played with the bracelet Issei had given her, emphasizing her words. "It really was something special, don't you think?" "Raynare?" Issei raised his gaze in great anger. "Don't scream my real name because you ruin the moment." Raynare shouted with a psychotic grin on her face as she created a spear of light. Issei dodged the spear of light with great difficulty, causing Raynare to laugh loudly. "Looks like you'll be making this a bit interesting. That pleases me, I won't be bored until your mistress arrives." Raynare added, creating another spear of light. She just wanted to have a peaceful life. Raynare looked at him somewhat disgusted. It was amusing when they talked about them, but not when he would bring that blonde girl in. "Do you really think she would have lived a happy life? Having ended up dead is the best option. You still don't understand how the supernatural world really works and you'll never have time to understand it." Raynare threw her spear in hopes of hitting Issei. The brown-haired man used his gauntlet when he saw that he had no chance of dodging it. He managed to block the attack, but it seemed that the gauntlet would not hold another blow. "I will avenge her." Issei shouted loudly, making Raynare laugh even louder. She was having a lot of fun with the current situation. Teasing and making her victims suffer was something she loved, those were her sins. That was her nature. Avenge her? If you could do that, what good would it do you? Raynare created another spear as she delighted in the broken expression Issei had. "Avenging you won't bring her back to life, you idiot." Those were Raynare's last words before throwing her spear. Everything became slow for Issei as he had a look of complete shock from Raynare's last words. That's right, what good was it for him to take revenge if that doesn't bring her back? That didn't mean he would stop hating her or forgive her for what she did. He just didn't want to stoop to Raynare's level. Asia wouldn't want it to be that way, and he knew he was more than that. Greg watched as the little violet spark fused with Issei's soul, causing him to go into complete shock. He would kill her anyway, but not for revenge. He would do it to make sure no one else fell into the fangs of such a viper. "If you can't give her back to me," he thought. Greg felt like a lot of emotions were running through his bear. But at first, it was only hatred. Now, he wasn't sure how many emotions were involved at the moment. But the vast majority of them were not pleasant. "If you can't give her back to me." Issei's eyes widened as a great red glow surrounded him completely. Raynare watched in shock as the spear of light shattered into 1,000 pieces upon contact with the blinding light. Dragon Booster. The gauntlet had undergone a small transformation, growing larger. "If you can't give her back to me, I'll make sure no one else has to go through the same thing." Raynare took a step back in complete shock at the sound of the boosted gear's voice. "Ugh. Boost. 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 Boost." Issei shouted loudly and lunged at Raynare at an incredible speed, landing a heavy blow to her stomach that made her spit out a large amount of blood. Issei spat out a small amount of blood because a light spear had pierced his leg. The protagonist staggered backwards, causing Raynare to fall to her knees on the ground while coughing up blood. Raynare looked up with a faint psychopathic smile as he began to heal. "I never imagined you had one of the 13 longinus. But that doesn't save you from the great pain that runs through your entire body when you come in contact with a spear of light." "What are you talking about?" Raynare was shocked as she watched Issei remove the spear like it was nothing, and a great gush of blood spurted out of the hole. "The only thing that hurts is the gaping hole in my leg. It's exactly the same pain as when you pierced my stomach." Well, it's even a little more painful, Issei commented with a somewhat grim smile, making Raynare panic. But how is that possible? You're a low-class demon, you shouldn't be able to move. Raynare widened her eyes in shock. Wait a minute, just a little more pain? Your body is supposed to be that of a demon now. How is it that you only feel a little more pain than last time? That's impossible. It's not that it's insignificant pain, but the desire to stop you is even greater than all the pain I'm feeling right now. Explosion. Issei's gauntlet grew even larger again, now covering his fingers and forearm completely, causing a second green gem to appear on the gauntlet. Issei took a step forward, not really caring what Raynare was babbling about, causing the woman to look at him in terror and barely get up from the ground. Raynare could only watch in shock. He released the boosted gear's second form and final form in just seconds. What kind of demon is he? Raynare thought in alarm as she created a spear and threw it at him with all her might. Issei just continued to advance and deflected the spear of light with his gauntlet as if it was a simple fly, making Raynare look at him in complete terror. Tiamat and Kaneko were about to leave with Asia's body, but they saw Issei fighting. Just as they were about to join in, they could both see Arias and Akeno at one of the windows as the Redid shook her head. The two got the message and turned to hide in the shadows, watching the fight. Raynare turned around and began to fly away in fear in an attempt to escape. Don't think you'll escape. Raynare looked back in horror due to the fact that Issei had grabbed her by the foot. The problem wasn't that he had caught her, but how quickly he had done it. I don't understand, he should be superior to you with my sacred gear. You're an angel, so fly. Issei exclaimed with anger contained in his words, directing a strong punch at her that made her spit out a large amount of blood. Raynare bolted towards one of the windows and broke it in the process, being outside of the church. Issei wasted no time and jumped through the same window, only to find Raynare lying on the floor with a very sore face, while the ring was a couple of meters away from her. Issei grabbed a ring and began to slowly move forward until he was in front of Raynare. The woman's eyes widened in terror. Raynare decided to use her last escape card. It was too low, even for her. But it was the only possible escape route. Issei's eyes widened when he saw how Raynare had transformed into a different person. Issei, please forgive me. I swear I didn't mean to do it. Please give me another chance. Yuma declared as tears began to flow from her face. Raynare suddenly returned to her original form, courtesy of Issei, as he grabbed her neck tightly with one hand and slammed her head into the ground, causing Raynare to gasp in pain. Issei sat on top of her legs with a dismayed look on his face. Raynare, I really liked you, I really liked you a lot. I would have done everything I could to make you the happiest woman in the world, not because you were my girlfriend, but because you were charming, shy, attractive, cheerful. You were an amazing woman. Issei tightened his grip on Raynare's neck even more, making her spit out some saliva. Issei raised his arm that held the gauntlet, pointing at the woman's face. But that wasn't you. Boost. The treacherous tear escaped Issei as he watched Raynare try her best to break free from Issei's grip as the pain was killing her. She couldn't even think rationally to create a spear. Issei's right arm reached the highest possible altitude. The protagonist looked up at the night sky with a broken smile on his face at a sweet memory. Please, let's go on a date. I guess I'll always be a loser with women. At least, I know Mitsuda and Motohama will always be with me on it. Boost. The sound of the boosted gear was the only thing heard for a second. After that, a frightening female scream was heard followed by multiple booms that echoed in a sickening manner. A few minutes later. So, this is the girl. Riaz looked at Asia's corpse with a smile. That's right, but it won't do any good to reincarnate her if she doesn't possess her sacred gear. Kiba answered seriously, causing the Redid to nod with a smile. Don't you think it wasn't necessary to let her die? Considering we could have created the magic circle in the church, we would have arrived in time, Kaneko commented as she looked at the blonde's corpse with her typical apathetic expression. It's something that was necessary. I knew Issei would release a new power through his feelings because of it. Riaz clarified, then gave a satisfied smile. Though I never expected him to awaken so much power. He gave the fallen angel a complete beating. Besides that, remember, she might not have wanted to be reincarnated as a demon if we rescued her. This was the most viable option. Kiba added with his typical kind smile. Kaneko nodded in compression. Now, we just need to bring the sacred gear to revive her. I don't think that's necessary. Akeno replied as she watched Issei enter through the shattered doors of the church. The queen licked her lips as she saw how Issei had the gauntlet covered in blood, along with part of his upper garment. Having heard the last words, Issei clenched the ring tightly in shock as he watched his friends. Issei quickly observed Riaz with a big hopeful smile. But does that mean you can reincarnate Asia if she has her sacred gear? Riaz nodded with a smile as she folded her arms. That's right, or did you already forget how we reincarnated you? Issei clenched his fists tightly and gave a big jump of joy. Quickly his joy diminished as his vision became blurry, along with a great dizziness suddenly hitting him. Mate, deactivate the boosted gear. I congratulate you on reaching the last release, but you still have a long way to go before you can control it without passing out from exhaustion. Issei just nodded and heeded immediately, deactivating his gauntlet. Issei, you did an amazing job. I must say I was very impressed by your performance. Rias congratulated him. Issei dropped his butt to the ground from exhaustion as he gave a thumbs up to Rias, causing everyone to smile at how the brown-haired man acted. Everyone thought he would be much more down about killing his ex-girlfriend, but he seemed to be more concerned about Asia's recovery right now. In fact, it wasn't quite like that. Simply put, Issei had made his point between him and the women when the fight against Raynare was over. But he was much more wrong than he thought, and he was going to discover in the future. 1 minute later. Issei watched in astonishment as the Rias bishop entered Asia's body. As your new mistress, I will grant you a new life. Rias finished her conjuration, causing the magic circle beneath Asia to disappear. Issei watched impatiently, waiting for Asia to wake up. Huh? Asia opened her eyes in confusion as a red glow flashed across her eyes for a second. Issei quickly rushed to Asia and hugged her tightly as he started to cry. Asia, Issei suddenly broke away a little. Do you recognize me? He asked rather worriedly. Issei? The now demoness asked in confusion. Issei hugged her tightly again, causing Asia to smile and return the hug. The hug lasted a few seconds as the young woman quickly pulled away from Issei, something that confused the young man. Who are they? Asia asked, looking at the others. Rias pointed to herself with a smile. I am Rias Gremory. They are all my demon servants. I was the one who reincarnated you so you could have a second life. You should know that I am your mistress from now on, and you are a demon. At that statement, Asia grabbed her head somewhat confused, but her confused expression changed to a disgusted one quickly. Issei felt a little bad knowing that Asia was devoted to God, even though she had been considered a heretic for curing a demon. He quickly tried to remedy the situation. But is there any way Asia can still perform prayers to God? At Issei's question, everyone present twitched a little, though the brown-haired man didn't notice. Well, he didn't notice it for a reason. Issei, are you crazy? I'm never praying to that idiot again, ever. Issei looked in shock at Asia for the out-of-character response she had given. Asia looked around in clear disgust. Besides, why did they have to revive me in a church? This place is disgusting. Before Asia could say or do anything else, Rias quickly went over to her and tapped her on the shoulder. That's okay. I'd like to give you some control lessons before you continue living in the mortal world. Rias looked back seriously. We'll be at the club. I probably won't be attending the academy for a couple of days. Before Issei could protest for an answer, Rias and Asia disappeared through a magic circle. Issei looked at his companions, waiting for an answer. A rather awkward silence ensued for several seconds. It's the demonic corruption, Kiba replied, breaking the silence. The week progressed quickly. Issei resumed his morning training without many problems, although things were very complicated when it came to practice with his boosted gear. According to Drake's explanation, he had evolved the boosted gear too fast without mastering it completely, and that made his body get exhausted very fast, and the only way to improve that situation was with a personalized training by someone who knew about sacred gear, that they understood how the dragon power worked, since technically the boosted gear is pure dragon power. He tried to seek help from his teammates, but Rias said she could help him in magical aspects, but not when it came to improving his control with the sacred gear. He also tried to ask Kiba for help, but the blonde said that when he awakened his sacred gear, he had never had any problem using it. In the end, Drake and Issei concluded to keep improving his physical condition, since that was what was stopping the improvement process at the moment. With Ria's help, Issei followed a training plan throughout the week. Regarding Asia, Issei had barely been able to visit her at the club these days. Although he was glad that she was well, her change of attitude made the brown-haired man cool his relationship with the blonde. Now, Asia had a much more direct and abrasive personality. There were even times when her attitude looked a bit sinister. The only sure thing for Issei was that she would never go back to the way she was before, and that was something that bothered him a little. Finally, he came to the conclusion that he would try to convince and warn all the people who wanted to become demons what they were exposing themselves to, unless there was no other alternative. If Asia had changed so drastically, being such a kind and timid person, he could not imagine what would happen to a person with a stronger attitude. In these few days that had passed, normal things also happened. Like Kiba's fan club. The ones branded as the pervert duo, along with the pervert's friend, something that played negatively on Issei's reputation, but that was nothing compared to how all the women viewed Mitsuda and Motohama. The only really important thing this week was that Issei discovered that there was more than one heir to a large family at the school. This heir was a woman and her name was Sona Citri. He also discovered that his pawn Wasaji had recently joined their ranks just before the start of school. He had not liked the boy very much because of his beepy and stupid attitude. But he quickly assumed that the demonic corruption had corrupted his soul, so in the end, he ended up pitying him. He only hoped that in time he would learn to control it, so to speak. After this summary, we finally get to the present day. Although there wasn't really anything interesting going on. For now. Issei was leaning on his desk with a completely bored look on his face. At his side, there was a backpack much larger than what would be considered normal. Mitsuda and Motohama left me again to spy on the locker room. I'd like to go too, Issei thought, not really giving his thoughts any importance as he was watching as the girls were gathered at a table and talking about the prince. The women all turned and shouted out of nowhere, causing Issei to cover his ears in annoyance. He decided to turn his gaze to see what or who had caused such a fuss. Speaking of Rome, Issei thought as he watched Kiba walk in, giving him a completely emotionless look. The women started whispering to each other as they saw Kiba sit down right in front of Issei's bench. "What's wrong, Prince Charming?" Issei questioned, raising his gaze slightly, with a definite teasing tone in his voice. Kiba shot him a nervous smile at his friend's attitude. "The butcher wants to see you." At this, Issei straightened up and looked at him very carefully. Kiba looked around and began to whisper very low. Once a month, a recognized family from hell gets a chance to visit the family realm. Luckily, the Butchu and Sona came to an agreement where the Citri family entered the previous month and we in this one. She will give you more details. Issei simply nodded in a somewhat distracted manner as he glanced sideways at the girls in the back to make sure they couldn't overhear his conversation. "What time?" he whispered. "In 25 minutes. 25. Is there a problem?" "No, it's just that number seems kind of curious to me." Kiba just shook his head at his friend's ramblings and left the place. Did he say family realm? Issei raised an eyebrow internally upon hearing Drake's hesitant tone. "Yeah, is there something wrong with that?" he asked very curiously. "Something weird?" "No, not at all. I was just asking. I've never been to that place before, but I've always heard some things." The fact that Drake was trying to correct his voice made Issei realize that he was hiding something from him. But he finally downplayed it. Lately, his trust with Drake had increased by astronomical levels, and he knew that if the dragon wasn't telling him something, it was for a reason. And many times, those reasons were personal. The clear example is when he wanted to know why Drake and Albion started their eternal rivalry. The dragon simply replied that some things were better left unearthed. Although he promised he would tell him when he was much stronger. Several minutes later. "I see, so that woman was your familiar," Issei commented as he listened attentively to Ria's explanation. The familiar left her female form and turned into a small strange animal with bat-like wings, then perched on Ria's shoulder. They were all gathered in the occult room, where Ria's had finished her explanation of what a familiar was. "My idea is to take you two to get a familiar. Besides that, this will be a good experience for you to begin to relate with atypical worlds." "It will be a good experience," Asia said with a sideways smile. Ria's raised her index finger with a small smile. "By the way, Asia, you're already enrolling in Kuo Academy tomorrow. I think you're already ready to enter, but be careful with your actions. I would hate to have to erase everyone's memory because you attacked a follower of God in the middle of a class." Asia just nodded with an enthusiastic smile. She was already looking forward to entering the academy ever since she had come to this place. Riaz looked at her two most resentful acquisitions with a smile. "Well, do you have any last questions?" Issei raised his hand and Riaz quickly gave him the word. "How different will this realm?" Riaz directed a sly smile at her. "It is not something I can explain with my words. You'd better describe it with your own point of view." Issei just nodded in understanding. Riaz called everyone to perch inside the magic circle, then disappeared. Issei and Asia looked around them in mild surprise. The sky was green, they were surrounded by trees and more trees, not to mention that they were ridiculously huge. They could also hear the sound of flowing water, implying that there were a lot of streams in the area. To top it all off, an extremely humid climate reigned over the place. "It's like a forest," Issei thought, looking in all directions, omitting the fact that the trees were an ash-white color, along with leaves that appeared to be made of green tea. "Wowed. Ooh. The only thing its inhabitants aren't the usual animals," Issei thought with a roll of his eyes. "This place is quite nice," Asia commented as she looked around with a bright smile. "Oh, so we meet again, Gremory girl." Everyone looked up to see a sort of version of Ash Ketchum, but much more grown up. "But you?" Issei asked with a confused tone. "He's the one in charge of keeping order in this realm. He makes sure that the demons don't harm the small ecosystem of this place, along with keeping order among the species that live here, as some are very territorial," Riaz explained wisely. "That's right, brat. This place seems infinitely vast, but it's much smaller than you might imagine. I need to make sure everything is kept in order. Especially since there's no other place in hell for these folks to move to if their home were to be damaged," stated the man in the tree. "Hell?" Asia wondered in disbelief. Riaz nodded with a proud smile on her face. "That's right. The family realm is located in an extremely hidden place in hell. For that very reason, only high-ranking families know the location of this forest." Before they could continue their talk, a small dragon descended from the air and stared at Asia, causing everyone to be surprised. But the one who was most surprised was undoubtedly the family caretaker. Asia just watched him for a few seconds with a slightly surprised gesture. The little dragon finally stopped studying her closely and leaned his head forward, indicating that he wanted to be petted. Asia didn't hesitate and stroked the little blue and white dragon's back, causing the little one to become happy and start circling around her. Finally, the little dragon landed in Asia's arms with great tranquility, and a small glow covered it for a few seconds, causing a small seal to appear on his abdomen. "I can't believe what I'm seeing. We barely got here and the lady tames a sprite dragon instantly, being a race quite known for being considered a rather surly, territorial, and highly untamed spice. I see you have a truly remarkable touch, young lady," declared the keeper, with great awe in his tone of voice. Everyone approached Asia and began to congratulate her, with the exception of Issei who was going crazy about the place. "Greg, what the hell is going on? I don't know if I'm going crazy, but I feel a lot of presences in this place." Issei widened his eyes to the widest extent possible and quickly looked back, having felt a disturbingly strong, but dormant energy. "Mate, calm down. This is completely normal. As you are in a small part dragon, you can sense the presence and power of other dragons for miles. This is an ability that only our species possesses, as others cannot sense presence, they can only sense the expulsion of magic and power. Although we can only locate us among the species. In addition, it not only allows you to know their presence, but also allows you to study their mood. Although that is already a very advanced level that you may not be able to reach due to the fact that you are not 100% dragon," Drake explained very seriously. A big cold sweat ran down Issei's face. "I understand, Drake." But Issei continued to stare back at him as a large icy colored aura rose from behind him. "It's normal that a dragon can possess such a suffocating aura and power. Drake. I'll call him Issei." Issei abandoned his worry to concentrate on Asia. He had yet to congratulate her properly. Besides, he had nothing to worry about. After all, he hadn't done anything to that dragon for her to be angry with him. Hadn't he? "Issei, that's a nice name," Issei commented as he approached with a friendly smile. Issei opened one of his eyes, and then a large electric shock shot out of his body and hit Issei hard, making the brown man dance in a funny way. "Hey Issei, that's not cool." Asia scolded her pet, though it didn't have much effect as she was holding in her laughter. "What the hell?" Issei asked, already rid of the electric dance. The caretaker directed a smirk at him. "Remember what I said. Those dragons are extremely territorial, and you just so happen to be a dragon." A moment later. "Hiya. Get it off me. Wait, let's not use magic or all our clothes will be torn to pieces. These things are disgusting. How naughty." Issei found himself turned around facing a tree fixedly as he listened to the whole party going on behind him. I don't have to resist the temptation." Diba swung a strong sword at one of the many slimes in the place, ridding Kaneko of the creepy creatures. "Issei, could you help me? Doing all this alone is a bit complicated." Issei turned his head for a second and could see how Aria's and Akeno's beep were almost exposed. Both women jiggled, making the beep vote in a sensual way, and if you add the fact that they were covered in the slime's drool, it gave the scene a rather lewd touch. "I can't." Issei quickly turned around and positioned his hands on his face to cover the large blush. Hamon Kiba replied with a nervous smile. "He's a pervert," Kaneko scolded with a frown. Hiba continued to eliminate slimes alongside Kaneko, but when the situation seemed under control, a small amount of them appeared through the trees, falling on top of the women and stripping them completely naked. "Hiya. I thought we wiped them all out," Kiba mused as he rubbed his cheek with a nervous smile. Issei was about to give in to his sexual instincts and turn his gaze away, but just appeared the caretaker in front of him. "Ahahahaha. These creatures feed on clothes, especially women's clothes, so it's normal that they're attacking them like that." The man looked at Issei with a smirk. Though usually, the amount of slimes reflect a man's sexual appetite and it's more than obvious who he's dealing with. Issei removed his hands from his face in shock. "Are you saying it's my fault?" The caretaker placed one of his hands on top of Issei's shoulder. "It's not that I'm blaming you, brat. You're just unlucky to have a libido 15 times higher than normal. I hope in the future you'll be able to control it without any trouble." The man looked amusedly at the women pulling out the drool. Because at the moment, you haven't done a very good job at hiding it if the naughty little ones became aware of your presence. The man turned away from Issei, causing the brown to give the man's words some thought. He finally nodded to himself decisively. He had to learn to control his voracious sexual appetite more than anything else so as not to end the reputation of his two best friends. He knew he couldn't get lucky with any women because of his past scars, but that didn't mean that women couldn't have a good impression of him outside of the love arena. Although by now you knew what Issei's biggest motivation to stop being a perverted beast was. Issei. Issei changed his determined expression to a slightly frightened one after hearing Ria's repressive tone. Assuming that the girls were already dressed, Issei turned his head slowly and began to sweat profusely when he saw the suffocating aura surrounding Ria's. Yes, but you? I understand that you can't control your sexual appetite and have attracted all those slimes as a result. But it was very wrong of you to stand by and do nothing just to see us naked. Ria stated with a frown. That was very wrong, Issei. Akeno supported Ria's with a seductive smile. Now my whole body feels sticky, silly. Issei said as she rubbed her uniform uncomfortably. Pervert. Was Kaneko's simple reply. Hiba would only get a bead of sweat from what was happening. As your mistress, this is something I cannot forgive. If you see us in danger, any kind of danger, you must always help us. Now it was stupid, but what's to assure me that you won't run away when there's a really messy fight? But you? Ria's waved her hand dismissively. Yes. I know you would never do that, but you have to keep in mind that I need to show you my authority so that something like this doesn't happen again. Ria's narrowed her eyes at the last words, making Issei swallow hard. Hiba, you're a man too, help me, Issei commented, giving him a pleading look. Hiba rubbed his hair with a nervous smile. I'm sorry, Issei. But I can't disobey Ria's. Issei just looked down, completely dejected by his friend's response. Ria's folded her arms with great seriousness. From what I've learned about you, I know that a punishment based on physical training would only make you happier. And the action you took today is not serious enough to whip your ass. But you, Issei looked up with a hopeful gleam in his eyes. So your punishment will be to stay here for 3 days. What? Issei shouted loudly over what he heard. A magic circle formed under Ria's feet. Her other servants gathered around her with a somewhat confused look on their faces. Apparently, they weren't too sure about this punishment. We'll see you on Thursday, Issei. Try not to move around too much in this place, or you might get in trouble with the dragons. It's the only territory they have left after the war, and they're excessively territorial for that reason. Wait a second. Issei tried to throw himself into the magic circle, but they all disappeared in his face. I think I prefer lashes, he finally said as he looked around with some fear. 1 hour later. Ahahahahaha. So, here alone for 3 days, huh? That's right. Issei and the caretaker were eating a large amount of berries and other fruits. It was obvious to say that those kinds of fruits were not common in the land, but their taste was still similar. Thank you for giving me some food. Issei gave the man a smile to indicate his thanks. No problem, boy. I know you're not someone who possesses bad intentions, just by looking at you I can tell that. Issei opened his briefcase and tossed all his books and notebooks on the floor to begin stuffing in the fruits. By the way, do you know any place where it's not dangerous to sleep? The man looked up with a thoughtful face. Not really. There are no places here that aren't dangerous, although there are places that are less dangerous than others. The man lowered his gaze with a serious expression. I recommend you stay around these areas, as they are the least dangerous. The man watched curiously as Issei closed his suitcase and adjusted the position of the backpack they carried on their backs. By the way, what do you carry in the backpack? Issei slung the briefcase over his shoulder as he directed a smile at him. I never go home after the academy, so I always take a backpack with me to have a large amount of water and food. Luckily, I'll get a lot of help today. The man gave him a worried look. Don't your parents worry about you being away for so long? Issei gave a derisive snort, causing the man to look at him quizzically. Issei would turn around and began to walk, raising his hand as a gesture of greeting. They sure will be glad not to see a hair of me for 3 days. The man gave him a somewhat confused look, but decided not to press the issue any further, as it seemed somewhat delicate. The man snapped his fingers with a smile. I almost forgot to tell you something. North of here is a cave that is quite safe. No one dares to go in there because of the freezing temperatures. Issei changed his direction a bit to head north as he pointed to his giant backpack. Luckily, my blankets were very torn and I had to buy new ones. The man continued to watch Issei until he finally disappeared into the trees. Anyway, I wonder what that place has to generate such a low temperature, thought the man, cupping his chin. Issei continued to move forward through the trees. He could hear the sound of lots of water and animals to his right, so surely there was some kind of lake in that direction. Issei put a goofy look on his face. I'm lucky to have a lake nearby, along with such vegetation. This will do me a lot of good to sustain me for 3 days. Issei put on his serious face again. I just hope my dragon sensor doesn't make an appearance again in these 3 days. I'd hate to have to worry about the auras found in the forest at nap time. Mate, I don't think it's as safe in the cave as that wanderer told us. Issei would raise an eyebrow at Drake's hesitant and frightened tone. Drake, do you have something wrong with this place? Ever since we got here, you've been acting like you've been afraid of something or someone. Me? Scared? Ha. You have no idea what you're talking about, brat. Drake replied with a clear tone of superiority. Issei gave a small smile as he looked at his right hand. So, what's bothering you? It's nothing, mate. It's just something insignificant. Don't worry. Drake replied with a clear confident tone. Issei looked straight ahead with a smile and continued to move forward. In that case, then there's nothing to worry about. Wait. Anywhere but there. Drake shouted with a clearly frightened tone. Issei stopped in his tracks and a small twitch in his eye showed the annoyance he was currently in. You know. If you're not going to tell me why I shouldn't advance toward the cave's top fasting me and shut your beep. Issei frowned and continued to move forward faster. Okay, if you don't want to tell me, that's your problem. Issei was advancing for a few more minutes until he finally broke through a tree and saw with great astonishment how the cave hovered about 40 meters away from him, showing that the surrounding vegetation was completely flattened by the weather of the place. The cave had a large hole in it and everything around it was adorned with ice. Before Issei could take a step onto the ice, Drake finally spoke. It's something from my past, for that very reason I don't want you to go there. Please, mate, listen to me. My bearers usually die from the battle against Albion for the most part, but they also die because of 2 other factors. One is because of the Dragon Slayer, and the other is in this cave. This misfortune is something that has been haunting me since the beginning of my battle against Albion. I don't like to remember and talk about my past, but I would hate for you to die, being the best bearer who has treated me in this millennium. Everyone has treated me as a source of power, but you are the first one who treats me as his mate. So please, I promise I will tell you everything, but I beg you for a little more time, as these are hard memories for me, because they are things that will never come back. Drake's genuinely sincere and concerned tone caused Issei to give a very pleased smile at his response. Alright, mate. I understand that your memories of when you were still alive are hard, but I just want there to be true trust between us. After all, we might get to live a great many millennia together. You're right. Thanks for not pushing me, mate. Drake thanked with a clear grateful tone in his words. Now, let's get the hell out of here. Issei lowered his raised foot, stepping onto the edge of the ice. The brown-haired man watched in mild surprise as the ice magically moved away from his foot. Inside the cave, giant eyes of a deep sky blue color would pop open. Shit. Issei was abruptly pulled into the ice sector by a huge icy dome that surrounded the entire surrounding area, being trapped inside the place. But what kind of witchcraft is this? Shouted Issei in shock, seeing the huge dome that was surrounding him. Issei quickly materialized his gauntlet and gave the ice pillar a heavy blow and didn't even get a scratch on it. But what is this shit? Issei questioned with narrowed eyes as he began to shiver from the cold. We're lost. We went too far in and she noticed our presence, Drake replied in a very serious tone. Issei blinked twice in surprise. She? The last factor that doomed my bearers is a dragoness named Tiamat. She's completely insane. It's useless for you to stay here. If you don't go, she'll come for us. Wait, what did you do to her to make her hate you so much? Issei put on a bored look. More personal, Issei, guess I'll ask her. You'll be very lucky if she lets you say more than 2 words that aren't part of your introduction. It was an honor to have been your mate for over 2 weeks. Hey, don't leave me for dead yet. Issei stated with a twitch in his eye. He didn't understand why he had to deal with his personal problems, but if he died because of this stupidity, his soul would enter the sacred gear just to kick his ass. Issei entered the cave, where he could only see darkness. He continued to advance a little recklessly through the cave until he ran into a stream of air that seemed to be a breath. Issei took a big leap backwards as huge beautiful eyes of a deep light blue color opened before him. I never thought you would come willingly to your death, Drake. Declared the figure as it stood up and spread its wings, having such a gigantic size that it spanned the entire cave. Issei would be much more frightened right now, were it not for the melodious and beautiful voice that came from a huge dragon, omitting the fact that the tone described her hatred. The dragoness's first words sent a slight shiver down his spine. After a few seconds, Issei watched in amazement as the entire cave lit up thanks to the ice that adorned it. He was even more amazed when he saw the huge 9-meter dragon standing in front of him. Her scales were completely white, except for her abdomen and wings, which were a light blue color, almost as strong and deep as her eyes. Then I hope you are prepared for your death, Drake. And if you're not, it's not my problem. The Dragoness's clearly annoyed tone snapped Issei out of his shock. Issei waved his hands in defense with some fear. Wait. I'm not Drag, I'm his bear. Tiamat narrowed her eyes, making Issei even more nervous. That's right. Now that idiot is a mere sacred gear, but you're both the same scum. After all, you are the Sekiryuite," said the Dragoness with a clear mocking tone at the end. Scum? What am I missing? Thought Issei carefully. Don't call me that, my name is Issei, not Sekiryuite. That's just a silly honorary title I get for having Drag. Tiamat's eyes flashed with a glint of intrigue for a second. How curious all the previous bearers I kill were rejoicing in their title like assholes. Seeing that the Dragoness had some interest in a chat, Issei didn't miss the opportunity and pointed a finger at her. Besides, I don't know what Drag must have done to you to make you call him scum, but I had nothing to do with his problems. Tiamat glared at him, implying that he had touched a very sensitive spot. So that idiot only rejoices in stories where he achieved great accomplishments, huh? In fact, he didn't even tell me anything about his life. But I don't plan to answer so as not to lose the chance to get out alive. Issei thought, feeling the sweat begin to break out on his face, indicating that his surface calm was slowly beginning to give way. Tiamat brought her face menacingly close to Issei's, causing the brown-haired man to panic a little. Not because of her closeness, but because of the pain and hatred her eyes gave off. I was completely in love with a dragon, along with 2 other females. In our species, it's normal to see males practice polygamy, so I didn't mind sharing him. But soon after, I discovered that he only wanted the other 2, and I was just seen as a trophy for my position. That caused me to fall into Dragonfall, a lethal disease that consumes you in a single week, and all it needs to sprout in your body is for your lover to betray you. It's an almost incurable disease, but if you overcome it, you'll never have to go through it again. Obviously, I wasn't emotionally strong enough to overcome it myself, but this is where Drake comes in. He took care of me for days on end to make sure I was okay. As I healed, I just couldn't help but fall in love with him, and I felt our connection was very special. But when I finally healed, he left me. I kept tracking him for a whole week, until I finally found him. Tiamat's eyes became a little teary. In the arms of another. And again, I was rejected. At this moment, Issei's fear had dissipated into empathy. In fact, he felt a great pity for Tiamat because he had experienced something similar firsthand, referring to the first part of the story. Tiamat turned her face away from Issei, and her tears crystallized and broke, so that she then gave off an aura of death around her. For that very reason, I vowed revenge. I took revenge on my former lover and took possession of this cave in the last millennium to leave only when I feel Drake's presence, only to go kill him. Tiamat only waited for Issei's answer to kill him. She only waited for him to reply like everyone else, "You are crazy. You're unhinged. For being that way, no one will ever love you or want you. Aren't you lonely?" Tiamat changed her angry expression to a very confused one. "What?" Issei rubbed his cheek with a nervous smile. "I'm just saying, you know. If you wait here for so long to kill Drake, that means you didn't talk to hardly anyone for a millennium." Tiamat looked at Issei with great surprise. "Well, I suppose. But I never really thought about it. I only had one goal in mind." Issei stopped rubbing his cheek and looked down with a slightly downcast expression. "I know it can be really hard everything you went through, but it's always good to try to get through it. And talking to people can help you with that. You know, don't make me laugh. Don't try to pity me when you don't even have any idea what it feels like." Tiamat roared with great anger in her words. "Why do you think I'm a demon? Don't take hasty assertions." Tiamat looked shocked again as Issei raised his gaze with great seriousness, plus he had yelled at her. How long had passed since someone had shouted at her? Actually, had anyone even shouted at her? That wasn't what was really on her mind right now. All she was thinking about was Issei's piercing gaze. No doubt the boy had gone through a similar experience to hers. That meant he understood her pain. Don't compare one thing to the other, mate. Your experience was far worse than that Dragoness's. Tiamat's scales bristled, indicating that she didn't feel like listening to that voice at all. How dare you, how dare you? The Dragoness roared loudly, causing Issei to be dragged a few feet. Issei clashed his hand with his face internally. At this moment, he was very angry with Drag. Just when he had a possibility to live, his own mate ruined his chance. The great amount of power that materialized as ice began to surround her, giving her a very imposing and threatening image. But Issei had his head elsewhere at the moment. "Why are you getting angry? You don't know what my..." Issei was so angry, he didn't even think his words. Only, they came out of him. They came from his soul. "Shut the funk up, you funking underdeveloped lizard." The suffocating atmosphere caused by Tiamat instantly disappeared, causing everything to go completely silent as the Dragoness had her eyes widened beyond belief. "Hey, I'm defending you. Watch how you address me, brat." Drake whispered under his breath in a very offended tone. Obviously, his whisper was of little use, as everything was completely silent. Issei just stood motionless watching Tiamat. A small icy stream was the only thing heard in the agonizingly silent seconds. After that, Tiamat's expression of complete surprise slowly began to soften. In fact, it looked like she was beginning to smile. Ha 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 ha. Tiamat rolled over on the ground as she laughed non-stop and grabbed her stomach with her forepaws. Tiamat began to hit the ground hard, making the whole place rumble. Issei couldn't stay surprised by Tiamat's reaction for long, because her voice and laugh was so beautiful when she wasn't threatening you with death that it was simply too easy to get carried away by her. For that reason, he too began to guffaw along with her. I don't like where this could be going. Thought Drake, very offended by what was happening. President, are you sure about this? Kiba asked with concern. Everyone in the club looked at Riaz with a raised eyebrow. Of course I am. It's the only way to get Issei to stop being distracted by trivialities. Can you imagine what might happen if in the middle of a raiding game a woman gets naked in front of him? Kaneko put a snack to her mouth and looked at Riaz seriously. I understand your concern, President. But remember that the family kingdom is fraught with danger for Issei. That could mean losing a very important piece to your team. Riaz simply squeezed her hand dismissively. Relax, nothing will happen to him. And if something were to happen to him, maybe that gets him to change his attitude a little. You should be more careful with those actions, President. I know you can treat him as you like because he is your servant, but remember that you can't afford to lose strength over stupid things. Especially at this time of year. Akeno clarified with a rather serious tone, something out of the ordinary for her. Riaz gave Akeno a penetrating look. She didn't like her servants telling her what to do, but she couldn't help but think that her queen was right. It's a few months away. If I can get the security to increase its power, it would be a guaranteed victory, Riaz thought with a hand on his chin, then raised his gaze with a smile. It's still a few months away, so you shouldn't worry about it, Akeno. Everyone else simply smiled at Riaz's response, except for Asia, who didn't understand exactly what he was referring to. Excuse me, President. But what will happen in a few months? Riaz gave Asia a very serious look for her question. It was something she didn't like to remember, but she would have to tell him. There was no use hiding it until the last second. Issei was sitting on the floor and leaning on Tiamat's neck while they were both still laughing, but at a much more normal pace than at first. The dragoness was still turned over on the floor, although she had already stopped hitting the floor hard with her hands. Apparently, the euphoria of the moment was gone. By dragons, my stomach hurt so much, I haven't laughed like that in a millennium. Tiamat exclaimed as she rubbed her abdomen with one of her paws. Issei looked up with a smile and leaned further into the dragoness's neck. Whew, I don't think I've ever laughed like this in my whole life. Issei looked into one of the dragoness's eyes that was looking at him piercingly, as if she wanted to study his soul. I think it was because of your laughter. It's too contagious. Issei said with a huge smile between his teeth, causing the dragoness's eye to widen a little at his words. Issei was a bit confused when Tiamat looked up and her smile changed to a serious expression. At least it wasn't an angry expression, like the one she had at first. You still didn't tell me your story. This statement made Issei look at her in surprise. The dragoness shot him a glare. You know, I already told you mine. It's only fair that now you tell me yours. Anything is better than you continuing to laugh at me, Drake interrupted with an annoyed tone. Silence, underdeveloped lizard. Tiamat's serious expression curved into a smile after saying those words. Drake grumbled under his breath with nothing in particular to be heard. He only seemed to lament that Tiamat had found his weak spot, and that weak spot was his pride. Issei's deep melancholy sigh caused Tiamat and Drake to leave their discussion for later and pay special attention to the chestnut. Before we begin, I would like to know, what is life and love to you? At Issei's question, Tiamat looked up, unable to find an answer. I don't know. It's not something you can describe physically. You just feel really good and then you want to die. The very out of context answer Tiamat gave made Issei shake his head. Issei leaned further against the dragoness's neck and positioned both hands behind her neck with a serious look. I guess you're right. It's not something that can be easily explained, but they are concepts that are related to each other. To me, life is like a drink, it makes you feel great, but if you try to taste more than you can swallow, it will just kick your ass hard. Regarding love, it's like a drug, it feels amazing, but it becomes incredibly destructive if you don't take the right one, or if you become blinded by it. Tiamat looked up with some confusion. I understand what you mean, but how does life and love relate? Issei clenched his fists tightly behind his head, something Tiamat noticed. Because the drug can funk up your life. Issei gave a heavy sigh and jumped up, turning his back to Tiamat. That's what happened to me. I tasted love and became completely addicted. I became totally blinded and couldn't see the true intentions behind my girlfriend. She turned out to be a fallen angel and she completely wrecked my life, killing me. Issei folded his arms then turned around with a smile. But someone helped me and thanks to that person I got a new life. Obviously, it's impossible for my scars to go away completely. Issei put a hand to his heart. In fact, they still hurt. But I won't accomplish anything by regretting it for the rest of my life. If I was given a new life, all that's left for me is to try a new drink and keep moving forward. When I feel like throwing up from getting drunk, I'll just have to endure it. No one has a life without ups and downs, after all. Wow, that's all Tiamat could say upon hearing Issei's story. He had definitely had a much worse time than she had, as not only did the woman betray him, but she also killed him. She was more impressed by something else, though. How can you still be smiling after going through something like that? The dragoness asked, finally rising from her previous position. Before Issei could answer, Drag interrupted. Remember, he was a human, Tiamat. He doesn't feel with the same intensity that dragons feel. Tiamat looked at the talking gauntlet with a frown. You're right, I had forgotten that detail. Issei was surprised at the response, for he thought Tiamat would be mocking Drag again. What are they talking about? Issei asked with great curiosity. Since I see that the underdeveloped lizard is still useless, I'll take it upon myself to explain it to you personally. Tiamat commented seriously, causing Drake to grumble under his breath again. Issei pointed at himself with a nervous smile. Does that mean you don't want to kill me anymore? I pity you. Huh? Tiamat's reply made Issei blink. Tiamat stared at him with her typical serious expression. As you heard. Even though you're not a dragon, I find it amazing that you've been through something similar, even worse than me, and you can still be so happy. Tiamat's eyes glowed in a singular way, something Issei picked up on. That made me rethink some things. If a mere human can get over it, why can't I? Tiamat lowered her gaze with a hint of sadness, something that did not go unnoticed by Issei. Besides, I've also realized that this is making me very ill. I will never stop hating Drake. But like you said, the hatred has so permeated me that I've been alone for a millennium. I guess when you told me that, it really hit me. Am I really going to spend the rest of my eternity hunting that jerk? I thought. Drake rolled his eyes at the last statement. But he opted not to say anything, as Tiamat was having a very strong reflection right now. Issei folded his arms, directing a chuckle at her. It's great that you think so. Tiamat directed a small smile at Issei, only to have a large glow surround her. Something that impressed the protagonist greatly. Before we begin, I'd like us both to make ourselves comfortable. The icy glow surrounding Tiamat disappeared, causing Issei's jaw to drop in complete shock. Now, the large powerless dragoness had changed her figure to that of a mature woman with a slightly taller stature than Issei. She was wearing an all-white shirt, along with jeans of the same color that tightly squeezed her legs. The shirt was missing a button at the top, revealing a small cleavage that revealed her large beep. Worst of all, her beep looked incredibly firm and soft, they were even bigger than Ria's, and that was very easily noticeable. Even so, her legs and butt were not far behind at all. In fact, you could even say they were sexier, as she had a large but moderate butt that clung tightly to her jean, giving the image that it was very moldable. Just like her thighs that seemed to be completely fleshy and soft, just like her butt and beep. But, the really amazing thing about all of this was that her body fell short of the beauty that her face gave off. She had creamy skin that was beautiful, along with a softness even higher than wool. Her face looked like it had been carved by the gods themselves, along with her deep blue eyes and beautiful expression, which gave off a breathtaking seriousness, making everything around her give her a mysterious touch. Her hair was of a lighter light blue color than her eyes. Her hair moved freely and with great grace until it reached below her waist. It looked incredibly silky and shiny, giving off another great aura of loveliness to her entire body. Wow, Issei just stared at her with wide eyes. The most beautiful woman he had ever met by his standards was Ria's, and this woman made the Reed look like the ugliest woman in the world. Tiamat crossed her arms under her beep and raised an eyebrow. Why are you looking at me like that? Is there something wrong with my face? Issei took a step back as he continued to admire her beauty. It's not that. It's just he didn't know dragons could shapeshift. Tiamat raised both eyebrows at the response. You don't know that dragons have human form? Tiamat put her hands on her hips and gave a big sigh, then looked up with great seriousness. Will be quite a while. Issei snapped out of his trance and directed a chuckle at her. In that case, Issei tossed a large backpack forward, causing Tiamat to raise an eyebrow. Line jumped. Delicious. Tiamat thought after taking a bite of the sandwich prepared by Issei. A small pleasant smile came across her face, showing her small canine teeth on the outside, giving her a rather tender appearance in Issei's eyes. They were both sitting across from each other on a blanket, simulating a picnic of sorts. They were at the exit of the cave, the ice had already disappeared, courtesy of Tiamat, because Issei was shivering with cold a few moments ago. Tiamat set her sandwich aside and returned to her serious expression. Well, what do you want to talk about first? Issei looked down at her sandwich with a thoughtful look. I'd like to know first why dragons have a human form. Did you pay attention to my body when I was a dragon? Issei simply nodded. So, I guess you remember that I didn't have any reproductive organs, right? Issei looked down with a small blush on his face. I hadn't noticed in such detail. Issei looked up in surprise. Wait a minute, you're telling me that? Tiamat nodded seriously. That's right. We dragons always resort to this form when it comes to reproducing. It carries a danger though, as our powers are reduced by 30%. Issei turned a sheepish smile on him. So, how do you guys take care of your babies? Tiamat bowed her shoulders. My mother never explained it to me, and I've never had a child either. In fact, I've never even had sex. A small awkward silence rose between the two, even making Tiamat nervous. The other thing you wanted to know, was it about dragon emotions? The Dragoness's question broke the awkward silence, causing Issei to nod quickly. Basically, we dragons are the most sensitive species there is regarding feelings. Just so you understand, if we feel joy, we feel it 10 times more, if we feel passion, we feel it 10 times more, if we feel sadness, we feel it 10 times more, if we feel hate, we feel it 10 times more. In fact, it is for this very reason that the fall of the dragon originated, because we enter into a state of depression so great that we end up dying because of it. The good thing about this is that it can only happen to you if your body is subjected to a great deal of emotional stress. It also has one factor in its favor, and that is that if you suffered it once, you become immune to the disease because your body has already adapted to the conditions it suffered before. But that doesn't mean you won't feel devastated if you go through something similar again. Issei rubbed his hair in surprise. Akaith, it sounds very complicated. Tiamat looked at him seriously, causing Issei to become a bit elated. You don't have to worry about it. Only dragons have these characteristics. You have underdeveloped lizard, but you're still a demon. You may acquire some dragon abilities and even have dragon aura, but you won't be a dragon. Unless you want to try, but I don't recommend it. Issei watched Tiamat with great curiosity at the last mentioned, but said nothing about it. In fact, you'd have to worry more about yourself. After all, being a demon doesn't guarantee you eternal life. You still have to face the other celestial dragon, and that's not the only thing you have to worry about. Tiamat frowned, causing Issei to pay special attention. There's also the Dragon Slayer. Issei blinked in surprise at hearing that name. From your reaction, I can see that you've already been told something about it. Tiamat grabbed the sandwich and took a bite, then lifted her gaze to remember. He's a very dangerous subject. He was created by the 3 factions a millennium ago to wipe out all dragons. It is true that to us, demons, angels, and fallen angels are nothing more than beepriches, with exceptions. As she said that last word, a shadow of a woman appeared in Tiamat's mind that had about 10 black wings with piercing red eyes. The problem is that even if they are beepriches, if you put the power of the 3 factions together in one subject, it makes it somewhat problematic. That's how brand congealment came about, an experiment that served to eradicate all the dragons below the Dragon Kings. Very few survived. Even 2 of the 4 great Dragon Kings died at the hands of those scum. Brand was the main dragon slayer, and if it hadn't been for him, they would never have been able to kill 2 of the strongest dragons that ever lived. Dragon Kings? Issei asked with great intrigue. Tiamat gave him a somewhat proud look. That's right. We dragons are a species that has a great deal of level difference between us, for that very reason there are scales. In the 5th scale, there are the weakest and least intelligent dragons, known as dragliers. Thanks to them is that the species still has a chance to survive, but being so weak they became the relatives of the demons, in exchange for living in this place. In the 4th scale are the dragons, here you could find weak to very strong dragons. In fact, Brand was the one in charge of killing the strongest of that scale, since not even the demon kings could take care of them. Unfortunately, each and every one of them was killed. In the 3rd scale, there are the Dragon Kings. Unlike the previous scale, these dragons have an enormous power, a rarity even within the dragons, and for that reason only 4 dragons managed to reach such a level. Something curious to note was that although they were classified with the same title, there was a great difference in power among the 4. Because of this, the 3 factions joined together with Brand to defeat Vitra and Fafnir, the 4th and 3rd Dragon King respectively. But as they saw that they could not defeat the 2nd Dragon King, Tannen, they all agreed to make a pact with the dragon, giving him lands of hell in exchange for peace. But not everything was rosy for them, as Brand defected from the 3 factions upon seeing this, and is currently wandering around to find and kill the bearers of Drag and Albion, although he now also poses a danger to the 3 factions. Basically, killing dragons is his only ambition in life. Wait a second. You're telling me that the Dragon Kings were so strong that the three factions had to ally to defeat them, and even then, they couldn't handle the second strongest. Tiamat smiled proudly at her genuine surprise. That's right. In fact, they might have been able to take Tannen if God helped, but apparently he didn't take part in the fight. Supposedly he had been greatly weakened after sealing Trihexa and the two heavenly dragons. Which, by the way, Albion and Drake belonged to the second scale, which would be the heavenly dragons. They were so strong that it would be cheeky of us to classify them as Dragon Kings. Issei raised an eyebrow in confusion. Wait. If the two heavenly dragons are stronger than the Dragon Kings, how come they lost? We didn't lose. Drake interrupted. We simply got overconfident since we didn't know that God had some items called sacred gear and that he could seal a part of our soul in it. Tiamat looked at the gauntlet with a smirk. You didn't defeat them, but you did lose. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking through a gauntlet. Face reality, underdeveloped lizard. Tiamat widened her smirk even further as she listened to Drake grumble under his breath. Tiamat turned her serious gaze to Issei. And before you ask, Trihexa was sealed thankfully. But it also took the dragon god by surprise, and it took the help of all the faction leaders to get it sealed, and I'm not just talking about the three factions, I'm talking about all of them. Trihexa was a global threat, so everyone had to participate. Still, the only option they had was to seal him in a dimensional prison. Issei blinked in surprise. How did you know I was aware of the dragon gods? Tiamat flashed him a tiny smile. I figured. The underdeveloped lizard is not such an idiot that he would forget to tell you something so important. The dragon gods are power at its finest. There are only three, though there is a rumor among the dragons that a fourth exists. At this, Issei looked at her with great interest. Big Red, the dragon god of sleep. Ophis, the dragon goddess of infinity. Trihexa, the dragon god of hate. And finally, there was said to be a dragon god of rage. But it has been a long time, and he has never appeared. It's bullshit, as far as I'm concerned. Tiamat took a last bite of her sandwich, rising from her comfortable seat. That's it. Yeah. Issei replied, absorbing all the information he had gained. Tiamat changed her typical serious expression to a small smile, revealing the tips of her fangs. It's been entertaining getting to know you. I hope you have a safe journey. Tiamat raised her hand. Issei directed a chuckle at her, shaking her hand. Likewise. It's been a bit of a scary experience at first, but then it's been fun. Tiamat covered her mouth with her free hand and began to laugh, leaving Issei delighted by her beautiful melody. Sorry about that and thank you. She said with a very grateful tone at the end. Issei was touched by her sincerity at the end, but didn't comment on it. Fairly well. Issei said, letting go of Tiamat's hand and quickly turning around to carry his backpack, not noticing that the dragoness had been staring at his hand longingly. Issei finally left the spot as she raised her hand as a gesture of greeting, without looking back. Issei's contented expression changed to one of complete shock. Friend. He thought internally. I know what you're thinking, mate. And I must tell you that Tiamat is the most beautiful dragon that ever lived. How could that jerk hurt her? Didn't he have eyes to see the incredible beauty he had in front of him? She was even willing to accept other women, as long as he kept loving her, but no. Thought Issei clenching his fists tightly. I get it, if at those times I hadn't fallen in love with Delia, Greg? Issei asked worriedly seeing that his friend had stopped out of nowhere. Nothing. It's just that I remembered something very funny. Issei simply nodded in compression. Partner, won't you stay with her? Greg's worried tone quite impressed Issei. I don't think it's necessary. Besides, why are you worried about her? She's killed some of your bears. True. But she's my kind, and he can't help but feel sorry for her. Greg thought the brown-haired man rather surprised by his companion's attitude, then gave a huge chuckle. You don't have to worry. She seemed really strong, so I don't think she needs my Issei turned around to give him one last look. Company? He felt stupid. Tiamat was still at the exit of the cave. The wind made his hair blow freely down his body. She had a serious and calm expression. But the look of her. Her gaze showed only a feeling. Loneliness. Hatred has so permeated me that I have been alone for more than a millennium. The memory of Tiamat's words made Issei clench her teeth tightly. How had he been so callous and stupid? Tiamat's eyes widened in surprise to see how Issei was returning with her hand raised in greeting, a nervous smile on her face. Did you forget something? Tiamat asked with a raised eyebrow. Issei looked away and rubbed his hair in embarrassment. Not really. In fact, I had come to this place to stay here in the beginning, and? Asked a dragon, raising her eyebrow even more. Issei finally met her eyes with Tiamat's. Well, I was wondering if I could. Yes. If you can stay. Tiamat interrupted Issei with great enthusiasm as she clasped both her hands under her beat tenderly from her. Issei blinked in surprise. Really, thank you very much. He responded with a big smile at the end. For 3 days, huh? Tiamat asked as she sat down across from Issei. The young man rubbed his hair in disgust. That's right. And it was all just because of stupidity. Issei would give a big tired sigh. Anyway. Now it's something that doesn't matter. He opened his backpack and took out a couple of sandwiches, along with the fruits he had received earlier from the caretaker. It was already evening. Issei had told him a bit of his story of what he had done once turned into a demon. He omitted to talk about his companions, though, as Tiamat seemed rather reluctant on the subject. Apparently, she still held a grudge as did Drake for what happened in the past, although her partner hid it very well. Tiamat grabbed one of the sandwiches and looked at it seriously. Tomorrow we'll have no choice but to forage for food. Is there something wrong with that? Issei asked with some amusement as he watched Tiamat sketched a small smile as she tasted the food. Apparently, she had a weakness to food, or at least, her food. Tiamat flashed a small smile at her, showing the tips of her fangs. You may not have noticed because you're not a dragon, but the area is home to a fair amount of dragons, I can sense them by their aura. Tiamat took a bite of the sandwich, making her smile a little more visible. They are very weak. But keep in mind that I couldn't even sense your presence, so you're even weaker than they are. Thanks for the compliment. Issei replied completely dejected as he watched Tiamat happily eat her dinner. Issei rested his cheek on his hand as he watched with a small smile as Tiamat thoroughly enjoyed her meal. After a few seconds, Tiamat finally noticed his gaze and raised an eyebrow to him in response. Something wrong? Issei just shook his head in amusement. Nothing, just that when I get back to my place, I'll treat you to a real dinner. Tiamat widened her eyes at the aforementioned, making Issei nervous. Though you don't have to if you don't want to. Clarified the protagonist, rubbing his hair. Are you seriously going to invite me to your house? Issei was taken aback by the great enthusiasm Tiamat showed with her words. The woman was looking at him very seriously, but her eyes and tone of voice showed great restrained excitement. Issei just smiled at her, of course. I don't see anything wrong with it unless you want to go somewhere else more ostentatious. Ostentatious? Tiamat asked with great curiosity in her words. For humans, what's a swanky place? Issei picked up a stick nearby and began to draw a restaurant on the outside of the sheets that made a picnic. This is a more ostentatious place. It's kind of expensive, but you'll eat a delicious dinner made by a person who specializes in it. Boring? Tiamat said with a rather funny expression. Issei watched Tiamat with a raised eyebrow, then gave her a smile and erased the drawing she made recently. She began to carve a new drawing. Then, we could go to a place where we can make our own food. He stated as he drew a park. Tiamat would rest her face on her knees as she looked at Issei with great interest. At this, Issei chuckled a little. You like that idea a lot better, don't you? Tiamat dropped her apathetic expression to the side to give him a small smile as she nodded. Without realizing it, they had both set a date for a date. Friendly date or not, it was still a date. Issei winked at her with a proud look. You'll see, I'll cook you something much better than this. Sounds very tempting, Tiamat said with a slight smile. They both finally finished dinner after a friendly chat. Now, the night started to get extremely cold and they both decided to create a fire inside the cave so they wouldn't freeze to death. Issei put on the 2 blankets he carried in his backpack, breathing a big sigh of relief as he sat down and made himself comfortable near the fire. Tiamat just sat near the fire, right at the other end where Issei was sitting. Minutes passed, Issei was about to fall asleep, but he could catch something a little sad out of the corner of his eye. Tiamat was hugging herself while shivering with cold. Issei was immensely surprised by what he was seeing. Tiamat. Tiamat raised her gaze in intrigue after hearing her name. How can you be cold? Issei asked somewhat worriedly as he pulled back the blankets from his body a little to fully reveal his face. Tiamat directed a smirk at him. I'm sorry, but I'm not immune to cold. My power may be ice and ice may be what shelters me, but I can't use my power because I might freeze you. You know, it's like someone with fire or lava powers. Even if your body is surrounded by its own flames, it won't do anything to you. But external heat can still affect you. Unless his power works differently than mine. Issei lowered his gaze in grief. That means you're getting cold because of me. Tiamat would look at him very seriously. I've been through much worse, so you shouldn't worry about me. Tiamat lowered his gaze again as she started rubbing herself again to get rid of the cold. Issei watched all of this rather pitifully. Finally he shook his head and smiled. Tiamat still had her eyes closed as she rubbed her body in an attempt to warm up and fall asleep. Suddenly, she felt a wave of awesome warmth invading her all over her body. She opened her eyes in surprise, only to see that Issei was pressed against her as he used the 2 sheets to cover them both from the cold. Issei hugged the woman around her waist, pulling her even closer to his body, causing the dragoness to rest her face on his shoulder. She clung a little to the blankets as she closed her eyes to feel the physical warmth embrace her completely. It felt amazing. Much better, isn't it? Issei inquired with a smile as she closed her eyes to sleep. Tiamat pulled her body a little closer to Issei's as an imperceptible blush appeared on her face. Thank you. Line jump. Tiamat stretched her body as she absorbed the icy blizzards coming from outside. Are you sure about going out? Dragons are quite territorial, they could hurt you. Tiamat warned, looking sideways at Issei with her typical apathetic expression. Issei directed a smile at her. Don't worry. I really want to get out and explore this place a bit, and I don't like the idea of you alone doing all the work. Tiamat looked straight ahead as she bent down for a stretch. As you wish. Issei looked away with a small blush due to Tiamat's butt pressed tightly against her white jean. Besides, this might help me get stronger. Stronger? Thought Tiamat seriously. Tiamat placed her hands on her hips and turned around to look at Issei seriously. Meet me back here in an hour. Issei just nodded seriously, only to be taken aback as Tiamat suddenly disappeared. Issei squeaked in surprise. She's really fast, partner. Drake chuckled a little under his breath, getting Issei to look down at his gauntlet with a raised eyebrow. What's so funny? Nothing, nothing. It's just, you still don't know a lot of things about her, Drake replied with an innocent tone. Whatever you say, Issei replied with disdain. The only thing that bothered her about Drake was that he kept things from her, but he wasn't going to force himself on her either. All in all, he knew that sooner or later he would find out everything. Line jump. I think this one will do. Issei said to himself as he took a fruit that resembled a banana from the top of a tree. Since those trees were gigantic, I don't think it's necessary to state that Issei was a few feet off the ground. Issei's smile changed to a surprised look when a shadow passed over his head. Partner. I understand. Issei stated seriously. I'd better get the hell out of here before I. Issei took a big leap and screamed as he was attacked by a blue-colored dragon that was about his height. The young man landed face first on the ground and quickly got up while rubbing his face in irritation. He didn't have time to insult the dragon as he activated his gauntlet, and the sound of boost echoed through the place while he dodged another dragon very similar to the previous one by the skin of his teeth. The two dragons stood in front of Issei, giving him a huge roar. Issei put his gauntlet in front of his face and the word boost resounded again. They seem to be very angry. He said as he looked at the two dragons very seriously. I don't know what happened, but they came straight for you. It's obvious that something has them very upset. Drake stated seriously. What should we do? Issei asked as she took a step back as she watched the dragons begin to slowly approach menacingly. Negotiating in this situation is ridiculous. We're not in their territory either, so they're angry about something else. They will not only come to harm you, but to kill you as well. So? There's only one option, run. Issei turned around and started running at full speed. Issei rolled on the ground to dodge two magical attacks that passed over his head and impacted against two trees, causing both trees to start falling. Both dragons reached Issei very easily and both tried to attack him while he was still not recovering from the previous attack. Luckily, he was just in time to defend himself with his gauntlet, plus both attacks hit in the same place. But the dragon's strength was much greater, so his gauntlet was severely damaged and he hit himself in the stomach from the pressure they exerted on him, causing him to spit out some saliva. Fortunately for him, the two dragons had to leap backwards as the two trees came crashing down on him, trapping Issei underneath. Both dragons widened their eyes as the dust disappeared from the scene, the fallen trees generating an X. When they looked around for Issei, the brown was no longer under the two trees. The dragons roared loudly with great anger and looked everywhere, then began to fly away. Issei was hiding behind a tree as he clenched his teeth tightly with some fear. He could only watch as his hand where his gauntlet previously was had about 3 claw marks that were making him bleed a little more than could be expected from a wound that had been mostly blocked. Damn, that was close. Thought the chestnut as he looked at the two trees that were about to fall on top of him. Let's get the hell out of here before they find us. And make sure you don't use the sacred gear or it might alert them to our presence, Drake warned wisely. Issei just nodded seriously and started walking in the opposite direction the dragons had gone. Line jumping. Issei watched with a small smile as many exotic animals were playing in the forest with each other. There were all kinds of species. This is a good sign. If there are so many familiars in one place, it means this place shouldn't be dangerous. That's good to know. Issei replied as he rubbed the wound on his hand with a small grimace of pain. Wob. Issei raised his gaze in confusion after hearing a cry come from the peak of a tree. The chestnut rolled his eyes as he saw how a small dragon was upside down because of some vines that had trapped it. It had small scratches all over its body. The clues indicated that it had ended up in that condition because it didn't know how to fly properly yet. Should we help him? Issei wondered, rubbing his cheek with a finger. He's not a baby dragon, but he's still very small. He probably won't want to accept your help at first because he's another dragon, but he's still very weak anyway. Issei became serious. How weak? I think they're close relatives of the dragon sprite, to give you an idea. Issei rolled his eyes. Like that little demon that's now Asia's familiar. Do you know how bad I had a hard time with his blue lightning? Issei angrily grumbled. Would you let a dragon child bully you? Drake asked with grace in his words. With other carriers, he would take this reaction as worrisome due to the fact that it could affect his image. But Issei was Issei. He couldn't take his fearful attitude seriously, being that he faced Tiamat herself. Although, come to think of it, maybe he would have been afraid if he had told her who Tiamat was in the first place. In fact, he still found it odd that she hadn't told him herself. Drake snapped out of his thoughts when he saw that Issei had his hand a few inches away from the dragon as he tried to untangle the vines. Got it? Issei tore off one of the vines that was holding the dragon's mouth almost completely shut. Seeing this, the little dragon's eyes gained a dangerous gleam and it looked very piercingly at Issei, causing him to become confused. From one moment to the next, the blue-colored dragon opened its mouth and spewed out one great flame after another. Issei began to scream and dodge all the attacks with better maneuvers than those demonstrated in circuses. Finally, a strange sound was heard from the dragon's mouth and some smoke came out of its snout, indicating that it had run out of magic. The dragon fainted from that very thing. Seeing this, Issei smiled triumphantly. How'd you like that, you little bastard? Issei changed his expression to a confused one, seeing that the angle at which he viewed the dragon had changed quite a bit. His face turned blue and he started sweating profusely as he realized that the tree he used to climb was in front of him. Aye. Issei tried to fly by waving his arms in vain, falling face first to the ground. Issei dug his face off the ground with a bit of difficulty, raising his face while drawing a completely bored expression on his face. That's twice now that this has happened to me this day and I've barely started the morning. Issei snapped out of his internal argument when he saw that the flames of the little dragon had somehow reached out to touch the vines and as a product of that, the little dragon might face a painful fall. Issei quickly got up from the ground and took a big leap forward, grabbing the little dragon with both of his hands. The dragon opened one of its eyes with great exhaustion, seeing that Issei had saved it. The chestnut was surprised when his new friend gave him a weak smile. Issei settled down to sit on the grass as a few family members surrounded him and looked at him with great attention for what he had demonstrated earlier. Greg, should we do something to get him healed? Issei asked, somewhat concerned about the little dragon's apparent condition. No, partner. He just had a lot of magical wear and tear, that's all. The other wounds are very superficial. You can leave him here no problem, I'm sure when he wakes up he'll go looking for his parents. Issei rubbed his hair with a worried look. It's okay. After saying those words, Issei gently supported the dragon on the ground, then set down one of the fruits he had gotten so far. Issei turned around to leave, but was surprised when he felt how the little dragon had clung to his back as he ate the fruit he had given him. Wasn't it going to be a while before he woke up? Issei asked with great surprise. Greg chuckled to himself as he understood what was going on. Apparently he hadn't run out of magical power. He had simply gone too long without eating. Issei shook his head in amusement, then handed him another fruit he was carrying in his backpack, causing the dragon to smile amicably. It's alright, friend. I hope you're feeling much better by now. Issei commented with a smile as he watched the little dragon eat the fruit, gladly. Let's go now or we'll be late. Drake declared seriously. Issei widened his eyes slightly in alarm. That's right. Tiamat said to meet him at the cave in an hour. Issei turned around and started running, without first giving his new friend a smile. I hope you have luck finding your parents. The little dragon could only watch as Issei began to disappear into the trees. He didn't hesitate for a second and started to follow him as he flew. Line jump. Won't you stop following me? I thought dragons were totally reluctant to hang out with others of the same gender. Issei would ask with a roll of his eyes. That's right. But this dragon isn't male. Issei began to sweat nervously as he would glance back sidelong to see the now identified Dragoness. That means. Drake was shocked at the thoughts that raced through Issei's mind. What, of course not. They may be of different gender, but they take a great amount of years of evolution with them. Issei put a hand to his chin at that answer. It's like it's between monkeys and humans. Exactly. I think the only dragon you could fixate on as your lookalike is Tiamat. But I'm sure that would be a bad idea. Issei widened his eyes slightly at the statement. That's right, I have to hurry. Shit, they detected us somehow. Immediately after saying those words, Issei stopped in his tracks as he saw the two dragons that had caused him trouble earlier appear from the sky and fall in front of him with a very angry expression. Issei gritted his teeth hard at the sight of the two dragons and immediately stepped in front of the little Dragoness to make sure she was not harmed. Both dragons looked at each other confused by what they saw, then looked at Issei again. Issei blinked in confusion. What's wrong now? The little dragoness would poke her head over Issei's back and give a happy snort, then fly happily towards the two dragons. The two older dragons greeted the little girl with a few small tears at the edge of their eyes, hugging her tightly with their wings. What did I miss? Wondered Issei, really surprised to see how everything took such a drastic turn. I never would have thought that those two were her parents. Issei could only watch as the little dragoness was pointing at him and talking very cheerfully in a language he didn't understand. But he was sure that his little friend was telling her parents how they met and how she was saved by him. When the little dragon finished telling her story, the two older dragons looked at Issei with wide eyes and a blush of embarrassment on their cheeks. The two dragons quickly moved closer, causing Issei to activate his gauntlet just in case. But he was surprised when one of the dragons gave him a deep bow, while the other hugged him tightly. Issei blinked in confusion, and all he could do was reciprocate the hug. What the hell is going on? He wondered internally. In short, the little girl told them how you saved her. As a token of gratitude, the male dragon knelt before you, implying that you have their respect to socialize with them whenever you want, despite being a male dragon. Well, the female is just thanking you, Drake explained in a rather calm tone as he saw that the situation did not get out of hand. I see. Issei thought as he rubbed his hair with one hand and continued to pamper the dragoness with the other. In the end, the whole slightly absurd situation had only made Issei fall behind with her work. Line jump. I'm 15 minutes late, Issei thought very nervously. Maybe it wasn't that long, but Tiamat had proven to have a very strong temper in the short time they had known each other. As he walked along, the three dragons followed behind him as they watched through the air, as the cave that was always frozen was now not. Although there was still a threat with an impressive aura in that place. They had only one question in their minds. How on earth could Issei go there without being annihilated? Although, it was also true that it was impossible that a dragon of his own rank could have such a powerful aura. That could mean that this dragon is more civilized than them. Issei crossed the last tree that blocked his view to see the empty path that led to the cave. A few meters away from him, Tiamat was waiting impatiently. As soon as she saw him, the dragoness quickly turned to him with her typical apathetic expression. Issei looked down nervously as he tried to explain himself. I'm sorry, a lot of things came up and somehow. You're fine. Issei widened his eyes as he felt Tiamat wrap her arms around him in a hug, resting her face on the chestnut's shoulder with a bit of regret. Issei simply said nothing and reciprocated her embrace, still with surprise still in effect on his face. Tiamat turned her face away slightly to look at Issei, revealing a genuinely worried expression. Since you took so long, I thought something had happened to you. She clarified as she cupped Issei's cheeks with her hands. Issei directed a goofy grin at him. Thanks for worrying, but I'm great. He held up his thumb for emphasis on his words. In these moments, that's when Issei realized that Tiamat didn't just possess a serious, strict and bloodthirsty personality. In fact, having been so long with great hatred in her heart may have caused her other emotions to be buried within her being, but that didn't mean they wouldn't come out again. Tiamat turned her face even further away from Issei and grabbed the brown man's hand with both of her hands, giving him a piercing look. Who did this to you? Issei winced slightly as Tiamat began to stroke his wound with one of her hands. Tiamat looked up with eyes that indicated suffering, causing the three dragons flying a few feet away to tremble in fear. The dragoness stopped caressing Issei's wound, making the chestnut brown impressed when the pain disappeared and a small column of ice covered his wound. He quickly began to feel the cold burning, but it was a pleasant rather than painful feeling. Tiamat narrowed her eyes at the three dragons. I'll be right back. After saying those words, Tiamat disappeared from Issei's sight, making the chestnut blink in shock at the sheer speed the dragoness had. When he turned around, he could see how she came flying with the three dragons clinging to her snout. It would be comical if Tiamat wasn't suffocating them with her suffocating grip. Tiamat landed in front of Issei and threw the three dragons to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The dragons quickly got up, fearful of what might happen. Who was it that did this to you? Tiamat asked in a calm tone, making the atmosphere even more tense. Issei looked down at his wound, then back up at Tiamat. It was the two biggest dragons. But I think it was some kind of misunderstanding. Tiamat gave the two larger dragons a piercing look with a glint in her eyes that indicated pain. Well. The dragons quickly began to explain themselves with strange sounds and moans, something Issei didn't understand at all. Though Tiamat's case was completely different as she had a hand on her chin as she nodded from time to time, indicating that she understood their language. Tiamat crossed her arms under her beat seriously. I see, so they thought Issei had somehow kidnapped their son to make them both leave this territory and leave it to him. The two dragons nodded several times frantically as Issei watched all this with great amazement. Tiamat watched the little dragon as she began to speak cheerfully, then began to circle around Issei with the same glee. Tiamat put a hand to her chin, and her apathetic expression changed to a small smile as she turned her gaze to Issei. I see, so you saved her, and thanks to that they were able to clear up the misunderstanding. That's great, because that means now you won't have to worry about getting through this place without other dragons attacking you again, since dragon territories cover a lot of miles. Issei blinked in confusion at this statement. Wait, then how come you can live here if it's not your territory? Tiamat looked at the two older dragons, causing them to start sweating a little. Because they know very well that it is not in their best interest to take me on. Tiamat stated with a mischievous grin on her face. Tiamat returned to her typical apathetic expression as she watched the three dragons. Well, considering it was all a misunderstanding, I guess I won't do anything to them. Tiamat turned away and placed a hand on her waist. What's more, I'll even let them come this way because I see that your daughter became good friends with Issei. Issei watched with a big smile at the little dragon as she continued to circle around him. That means I found a familiar. At these words, the little dragon stopped dead in her tracks and looked at him carefully. Issei clenched his fist tightly with a defiant smile. With our strength, I'm sure Issei received a strong attack of fire, causing his entire face to go black. He opened his eyes with a dazed expression on his face as he spat smoke from his mouth. The little dragon was just watching him in triumph. Drake began to guffaw at this, while Tiamat lowered her head and shook her head in disappointment. You have the aura of a dragon. You can't ask another dragon to be your familiar. It's like you're insulting it. Tiamat stated, then looked at Issei's face, causing her worried look to return to her face. Are you okay? Issei directed a smile at Tiamat for her great concern towards him, causing the dragoness to reciprocate with a slight smile. Blind jump. It was already a little late, the dragons had left the place, leaving only Tiamat and Issei in the cave. They were both sitting near the campfire while the chestnut was telling her a story about his two best friends. The funny thing about this is that Mitsuda and Motohama had to turn to me in order to save themselves from the wrath of the Kendo women. Issei shook his head at the end at the attitude of his friends as he shared the blankets with Tiamat. The dragoness would only increase her smile and force a little, leaning a little more on Issei's shoulder. Why are you like this? Issei looked at Tiamat in confusion. Like what? Tiamat opened her eyes and raised her gaze to look him in the face. You're cool. Issei blinked in confusion at her statement. Cool. He was sure no one had ever paid him that kind of compliment before. Tiamat lowered her gaze again and rested her face on Issei's chest, causing the brown-haired man to be a little surprised. I don't understand it very well either. I just think you're great because you make me feel great. In just these 2 days, I've felt so much better than I have in hundreds of years. That wasn't really a hard thing to accomplish, considering she'd lived alone for a millennium, but it was a subject Issei didn't want to remind her of. Issei rubbed her hair with a small blush of embarrassment. Well, you know, you just needed someone to understand you a little, don't you think? Issei lowered his gaze somewhat in disgust to see Tiamat frown at his words. I just think you were unlucky. Tiamat raised her gaze with a frown, bumping her nose against Issei's. Bad luck. If I just needed someone to understand me, why did it take me so long to show up? Tiamat flashed a beautiful smile at Issei, managing to make the protagonist look surprised. To my mind, cool people are unique. Considering it took you so long to show up, you're someone unique. Tiamat lowered her face again to lay on Issei's chest, hugging him deeply. You're great. Issei reciprocated the hug with great surprise at Tiamat's words. Simply put, I did what anyone would have done. If it were as you say, you wouldn't be unique to me. Therefore, you would not be great. Nor would you make me feel great. Thanks, I guess. A small blush appeared on Issei's face, feeling Tiamat cling a little tighter to her body. You must be really cold. Line jumped. Issei and Tiamat were drinking a juice they had made last night, using the water bottles that the brown man had brought as a container. They were both sitting on the already somewhat dirty blanket. We should stick to a bath today. Tiamat commented as she looked down at herself to see that her hands were somewhat dirty. Yes. We also need to take the opportunity to clean our clothes and stuff. Issei added with a bored expression. Tiamat looked at him with slightly widened eyes. Can't you materialize clothes with your magic? My magic reserves are almost nil. A depressive aura surrounded Issei after saying those words. Tiamat looked out of the cave somewhat surprised by the revelation. Oh, he understand. That might be a problem if you want to become stronger. Issei looked at Tiamat quizzically at what she mentioned. The dragoness just looked at him seriously. If your magic reserves are almost nil, you can only rely on melee combat or with bladed weapons. Honestly, I have no idea what the undeveloped lizard can do, nor do I care to know. But if you really want to become stronger, you should improve your fitness and technique. Drake grumbled under his breath due to the fact that it had been a long time since he had been called that way, and for a moment he had thought she had forgotten. Issei directed a smile at him as he clenched his fist. I've already been practicing my physical condition. Though lately I've been a bit stuck with my progress. He added the last somewhat embarrassed. Tiamat moved a little closer to Issei and began to touch the muscles in his arms, getting the young man to blush a little. I can see you've been training hard. But there's no use increasing your power if you lack technique. Tiamat stopped touching him and rested her knees on the ground very close to him. Being the security, sooner or later you will become powerful. But that also means you will face powerful opponents, and believe me, they will indeed have good technique and combat experience that will crush you instantly. Issei lowered his head, dejected by the revelation. So, how can I improve my technique and power at the same time? I've already asked the president, but she doesn't know how to help me. She only told me that I should improve my physical condition even more to have special training. Tiamat gave a small derisive snort. That girl is just like you, she has no experience whatsoever in really dangerous combat. Although, I must say she's right about one thing. I can see that your physical condition is not good, but not bad either. You have to keep improving that aspect, and there will come a time when your body will be able to withstand the power of the sacred gear much better. But it is not convenient that you only exercise, you should also enter into friendly combats against other people who can teach you new techniques. Tiamat pointed to herself with a proud smile. Like me. Issei blinked in shock. Does that mean? After the bath, I'll teach you a thing or two. Tiamat interrupted him with a small smile as she nodded. Follow me. I know just the place. Tiamat got up from the ground, being followed by Issei, who was gathering all his things to wash them. As Issei gathered his things, he gave Tiamat a curious look. Or rather, at what she looked like. The dragoness stood at the edge of the cave, so the wind made her hair wave in a majestic way. She always had that serious expression that didn't ruin her beauty, along with her beautiful face and knockout body. Why are you looking at me so much? Tiamat asked with a raised eyebrow. Issei just looked away, embarrassed by the previous thoughts. I was just wondering how someone as young as you could fall in love with Drake. I mean, Drake was physically 40 years old at the time, and you're much younger than that. Tiamat looked down and folded her arms seriously. I don't know why it happened, I just fell in love with him. I guess there's no such thing as age difference when it comes to love. Tiamat turned around and started to walk away, being followed by Issei. When I fell in love with him, I had barely turned 21 years old. Now, it's been a little over 1,000 years since then. Although it was a long time ago, my physical appearance is still 25 years old, just like back then. End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.